Okay, we've got about 10, 12 minutes for questions and maybe a bit of discussion. So were there any questions at the back there? Yeah. And then you here. Over there.
On the weather point in particular, but I think this probably relates to a lot of the issues around food as well. I don't think it's just a mundane thing that makes the weather maybe having a relationship to public attitudes around climate. There's an awful lot of work that goes into that. So for example with ClimateGate, although that wasn't related to weather, but one of the reasons why it percolated up into the Today programme and we continue to see people like the Global Warming Policy Foundation maybe getting more attention than you'd expect, is because of particular relationships and social connections. And as sociologists, I think we should be aware of that and thinking about that. And the same with weather. With the latest stuff with Sandy, climate activist groups in America have been doing a huge amount of active work to connect those. And I think you can probably see it in the other way too. Arguably, Boris Johnson's point about looking out the window and having that empirical moment was equally an activist. What is it? It's a deliberate movement and connection of those things. So it's not just it's mundane, people are looking out the window, we need to understand that people have a physical relationship with the environment, although that's also true. But we have to also be aware of an awful lot of social interactions and sometimes deliberate, sometimes hidden activism around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, mundane, if you like, was me just comparing it to the idea of scientific authority. And yeah, I did have quite a lot of stuff about kind of grassroots activists in this talk, which I just had to kind of leave out, if you like. But yeah, on both sides we have this, and we've got this idea of climate change communicators now focusing on extreme weather quite a lot. So if you look at kind of Bill McKibben and his activity on Twitter, it's all about extreme weather and divestment as well from climate change. So it's seen as a way of winning the argument one way or the other. So it's seen as something tangible that people can link onto. And obviously, because of that recognition, then we have people working very hard to emphasise these links, for sure.
Okay, there was a question just here.
Roland Jackson from ScienceWise. Questions were stimulated by Adam Spencer's point, but I think a general one as well. I think that was something that Alice was hinting at earlier. You sort of outlined the framing of current food debates around global food security and pointed out that certainly in the research area, the rhetoric now is all around increasing yield rather than reducing waste, which of course is another major alternative, and not necessarily alternative to put it all together. And interestingly, the public dialogue the Global Food Security Programme commissioned came out with some quite strong views from the public around the importance of looking at the waste side of the argument. So the question to you as this programme, and I guess to social scientists in general, is to what extent are you happy to reflect on these matters and draw the people's attention, and to what extent are you sort of able or want now to engage in real-time political debate? Because this bandwagon is moving very fast around food security. Can you, as researchers, and do you want to intervene in that process, or you have to sit on the sidelines and comment, usefully and interestingly, but not take part?
Golly.
No?
How's that? Right. Gosh, do I want to participate? I think people who know me will say it's, I sometimes find it very difficult not to participate. But that's not the goal of the programme, really, or of the project within the programme. We're much more interested in teasing out and reflecting upon these developments and making them more public. So our research may be of use to groups who wish to engage more actively in those debates, but I don't foresee at the moment, at least, that the project in which I work will be a focus, if you like, for the activist community.
Okay, we have another question. No, sorry, it was Ulrika just in front of you. I've seen 4 hands go up, so I'm just going to take those 4 questions, which is Ulrika, the gentleman here, and then the 2 over here. Yes.
My question is particularly triggered by the food part, but that would hold maybe also for the others. How far do you take into consideration the kind of local constituency around food? I mean, how much is it culturally differently rooted and handled than in other European contexts? I just remember many of the cases you mentioned, they are discussed very differently in other parts of Europe. And so I was wondering, like, how one could use the comparison as a lens to better understand how particular problems come about and are treated and understood as local, or are they understood as global, or as what? And I was kind of interested in how deep you go into these aspects.
Well, we'd certainly want to, and have looked into the scales that people have been using to underpin their arguments. So we have this idea of global food security itself is a scalar idea. Oh dear, I do wish I was an Amish sometimes. Come on. We do have, the globe is being mobilised in some of the global food security debates. Our research focus is on the United Kingdom, and in particular on the research agendas taking place into food security in the United Kingdom. Although clearly these other scales become apparent in the way in which they're mobilised and used in debates around research agendas as well. So you can see with some of the waste reductions, the scale can often be much lower. And of course, when you're thinking about diets and obesity, the scale is the individual. So they're part of our work, but they're not, if you like, the direct focus necessarily.
Okay, just the man here.
Mike Edwards, City Councillor. On the climate change thing, I mean, we are doing a lot of green things in this city, including providing a tram system for the university. And it's true, there's a lot of things that we want to do for its own sake rather than tackling climate change. But regarding the point of science, if you saw the Al Gore video, it's hundreds and thousands of scientists telling us climate change is happening, and it's a problem given the way we've invested so much in the way where we live, where our cities are, all of that. And I just can't get my head around a question that says, well, you know, should the politicians really have decided that science was the imperative for acting on something, when it is so massively overwhelming that this planet has a problem coming? It's actually politicians have got that duty to act. And frankly, yes, the science is the argument that tells us we've got to do something about it, because it is so massively overwhelming, scientific opinion. So I don't quite get where that's going. What I would say is, I would ask colleagues in all your research to remember some of the good work that's been done in the past about just what politics is and how it is the sign that we live in a free society. And I guess the other thing I would say has happened is that there's a lot of knowledge developed in the political world about how we deliver change. I'm not entirely sure that the academia is caught up with just what it is we do now to deliver change, because there's a lot to learn and a lot to know. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so what I would say to that is, I mean, this interaction of science and politics, perhaps, it's got, I was picking up more of the impact on science, perhaps, than on politics. And I certainly agree that politics is, you're quite right, the sign that we live in a free society. So for that, you can almost read, if you like, some kind of democratic legitimacy for what you're doing. And the tram is a great example of a kind of a green policy in the city. But as you rightly say, it's not being done just for the sake of reducing carbon emissions. It's being done for, certainly, excuse me, I mean, reducing congestion and connecting parts of the city which haven't been that well connected before, are perhaps more in the minds of your constituents than climate change as an issue. I think I'd be right in saying perhaps.
We're at 12:30 and I've got 2 remaining questions to take. So some of this discussion can continue over lunch, no doubt. Just Adam at the back and then the gentleman at the front.
John Beddington, the chief scientist, recently published a document sort of advising policymakers within government and all across Whitehall actually on how they can use the fruits of research more and how they can encourage researchers to sort of translate their research into policy and take it down to Whitehall. And they had some useful tips, like academics obviously they need referable impact statements and things like this, and also that using academics can often be free and things like this. So I just wanted to ask the research fellows here, and picking up a little bit, Adam, on your point about how the research is used, whether you're building that side of things into your research and thinking actively about how policymakers might use this and going to policymakers, or expecting them to come to you.
Well, I don't know what to say a great deal given the time, but I think it would certainly be fair to say that in academia we are strongly encouraged to consider the impact of our research. So, yes, I mean, it's quite likely that we would wish governments and policymakers to be aware of our research. Yes, how we do that we haven't determined.
The last question was this gentleman at the front.
Thanks very much. A brief observation and two questions arising from Warren's presentation. I can't help wonder whether the very fact that only 5 MPs voted against the Climate Change Act, when the delivery of the outcome of that act isn't due to 2050, wasn't something to do with the not in my term of office effect as much as it was enthusiasm for doing something about climate change based on science. But the two questions, one is a specific question, Warren. I think in the social sciences we do have a bit of a tendency to look for single explanations of phenomena. And notwithstanding what you said, it seems to me there are two other trends that have been very important, potentially significant, that you didn't mention, that were happening simultaneously with the weather events that you discussed. One of those was clearly the economic downturn, and that suggests that people's concerns were focused elsewhere, and therefore attenuating their immediate concern about climate change. And doubt about the science is, of course, a convenient rationale for why I have attenuated my worry, because, oh, well, perhaps things are a bit more uncertain. And the second one, I think, is the phenomenon of catastrophe fatigue. We have been beset for the past 20 years by repeated claims that we only have 5 years to save the planet, 10 years to save the planet. In the area of food security, incidentally, of course, we've heard similar kinds of prophecies of doom, particularly coming out of some of the NGOs in the United States. And so there is perhaps a sense of scepticism about these repeated catastrophic claims that are not borne out in the time frames that they're suggested. And that brings me to my final question, which is also inspired by what Warren said, but I think is general to the panel. And that's the question about the wisdom of the deployment of bad arguments for good causes. The quotation that you showed from the Boston Globe, I think it was, the very nicely qualified one, reminded me of Bob May, the former government chief science advisor, talking about Hurricane Katrina. This is the chief science advisor, you will recall, who said that version 2 of the deficit model, it's not about people don't understand the content of the sciences, they don't understand the limitations of scientific inquiry, such as you can't prove a negative proposition. And in commenting on Katrina, May said something to the effect of, this is more or less an exact quote, nobody can say that this was not a consequence of climate change. In fact, therefore, giving us a lovely example of a non-disprovable negative proposition. And I do really wonder about the danger of this temptation to link extreme weather events, particularly hurricane events, to climate change as a way of trying to persuade people to do the right thing, because for other reasons we may believe it to be correct that they should do the right thing, but nevertheless knowing that this particular argument is weak. isn't that really a very dangerous political course to steer when you get when it is revealed that in fact your argument is not a sound one? Do you not risk losing the larger credibility for the argument you're trying to make? I think that applies also to the food security issues and other issues as well. So thanks.
Thank you. Shall I?
Yeah, go
first. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, sure, there are other trends. I just picked out the one about the weather because perhaps it's not as well documented or highlighted as some of the others, especially as there seems to be some accepted wisdom about ClimateGate. The economy certainly downplayed all other kind of typical political considerations in public opinion. So even things like crime became less of an issue for people after the economic crisis. So that's not particular. It's true for climate change, but it's not particular to climate change. But it certainly had an effect. And about catastrophe fatigue, I guess that's one of the interesting things about why the weather has come to be a public meaning for climate change, because the weather is something that we experience, and it shifts the time frame from something in the future that we can't possibly know for certain to something in the present, which, as Boris Johnson said, we can look out the window and have a look at, no matter what you may think of his piece, and something we've experienced recently. So it's from something that we can't know to something that we do know and can know now, no matter what the scientific basis for it is. And I totally take your point about the kind of bad arguments for good reasons, but I'm just kind of picking out whether or not that is a kind of a wise course of action. You can see the political justification for it, even if that road is full of pitfalls.
And perhaps just to add from the food thing, I think the catastrophe notion is one that is very much coming from official sources. There's this picture being painted that with world population to rise to 9 billion by 2050, climate change, changing food eating habits, we must produce more. And that's the sort of catastrophic vision that, if we don't produce more, then at some point in the future we're going to be unable to feed ourselves properly. It's part of the official discourse, I think. Although I would recognise, some of the debates around particular technologies might, some of the opposition groups to things like GMA may also choose to use catastrophe type imagery in their arguments. There's also, I think, a very strong link between both Warren and my work with weather, because I've attended meetings where scientists have used the argument that, well, it's not so much gradual climate change that is dangerous for crop yields, it's individual catastrophic weather events. And so some of the talk comes about, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could change wheat, for example? You could increase wheat yields by changing them so that they lose a sort of waxy coating which appears on the wheat ears. If you take that off, then the plant has more energy to go into production. But of course that waxy coating is in order to protect it against drought, water loss. So if you're thinking about, well, if you then have a catastrophic drought, you're going to lose more of your crop than you would otherwise. So there's different ways in which those arguments interplay. But I think there's clearly weather is a very strong link between the two empirical projects here. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there, but thanks everyone for their questions, really stimulating questions. A round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.